On another subject is ESPN. You've
Mm,
talked about this recently, and something I've talked about too. They've lost quite a number of basketball people over the last, call it, year at least, with Doc
yeah.
Rivers, JJ Redick, Woj, and now Zach Lowe. What is your sense of what their plan is with basketball at ESPN?
I think just to run it a little bit more like a Potemkin village, to just have this exterior skeleton and not as much content from within, because the main business over there is television rights, sports television rights. And back in the day when ESPN was effectively printing money, they could be this more robust entity and have journalism. In a weird way, people are lamenting the death of all of this at ESPN and all of these people who have left. And Zach Lowe is the preeminent NBA writer and podcaster, and they're saying it's so sad. But I almost look at it the other way and I go, man, it was some crazy accident of history that this cable company with sports rights happen to have all these quality voices doing journalism and educating fans in this sort of highbrow way. In a way, we should be grateful that there was even Zach Lowe.
Yeah.
It's not always the case that this tends to happen, and nobody seems to care that there is an absence of it at some of the other sports rights holders. Nobody is going, oh man, why doesn't Fox Sports have some of the greatest just journalism devoted to the major sports leagues? Nobody cares. And nobody cares that NBC has some of it, but it's not just far ranging. They don't care. They care because ESPN established a baseline of having this. And now that they're hemorrhaging money because streaming has not worked out for Disney, and now that the cable bundle is increasingly less profitable, they are cutting a lot of the quality and ripping out, as Bill Simmons called it, their soul. And I know a lot of people who are NBA fans were saying that it doesn't matter if the viewership is going down because it's still a coveted asset. And in a way, they're correct. The NBA paid way more, or I should say ESPN paid the NBA way more for TV rights than before, even though the ratings went down by about half. But I do think part of that story is that that's okay for the NBA, and that's a great deal signed by Adam Silver, but somehow ESPN has to make up the difference. And what they're looking at is an asset they can't afford to lose, because then your carriage fees, the money that you just pass along that goes to them in your cable bill, if ESPN doesn't have sports it's carrying, those fees can get argued away, and that's a tremendous loss. So they can't have the bottom fall out of their business. So they need to keep the sports rights fees. They need to keep the leagues going. So they'll pay more to save themselves for the NBA. But if half as many people are watching, the money's got to come out of somewhere. If
Yeah.
you're paying billions more for an asset and there's no obvious way as to how you can make billions more for that asset, well, people are going to get fired, and they're not all going to be inessential. A lot of them are going to be people who do things that matter to the fan. So that's the economics aspect of the story. I think it's really easy for people to say ESPN, they're such idiots. How are they firing all these people? But those same people want ESPN to keep the NBA on ESPN. So it's kind of got to be one or the
Yeah.
other, I think.
And I actually don't think ESPN is stupid for doing it, right? Like they have their reasons, much of which people won't discuss. But I view ESPN's business, and I wrote about this morning, as sort of like a barbell, right? Like similar to what you said, on one side of the conversation, they're just going to spend all of their money on live sports rights. They know premium sports rights are what people want to use their platform for. They make all their money through cable. They're eventually going to need that stuff for a OTT streaming platform, right? So that's going to be where,
Yeah.
like, call it 95% of their money goes. Then on the other side, you're going to spend the rest of the money on people like Stephen A. Smith, Pat McAfee, Kendrick Perkins in the NBA. And it's people that make the most noise online, that are going to be great for social media content and drive more viewers, casual viewers, towards those games that you're paying that much money for. And I think Zach Lowe sat in like sort of a weird spot because he was
Yeah.
sort of in the middle, right? Like he made a good amount of money. They say seven figures. He did really, really good content, but a lot of it was placed behind the paywall at ESPN.com. He did some video stuff, but he probably could have done more. And since his content is for like an educated fan, most of the people who enjoy his content are going to watch the NBA regardless, right? So he's in like this
Yeah.
weird bucket where you're paying seven figures for a guy who probably really doesn't drive all that much viewership to the thing that you're spending 95% of your budget on.
At least not obviously.
Yeah.
And there's this other cultural aspect to it, ESPN, where it's a difficult place to work. I know people listening to this might go, "Oh, boo-hoo, my job is hard too." I get it, but I'm just explaining it. It's such a large institution, and one hand doesn't know what the other hand is doing, and your schedule can just go crazy because there are all these aspects, and when you're hot, when you're a big name over there, like a Zach Lowe, everybody's trying to come for your time. But what happens is that there are really 2 options there. There are 2 when it comes to television, and it's this. It's either you're starving, they don't want you, they're not gonna ask you to go on TV ever, or you're that scene in Monty Python where you're just gorging yourself so much that you explode. Those are the 2 options. So when people complain, "Why is Kendrick Perkins on my TV all the time? I didn't ask for this." It's probably because Kendrick Perkins never says no. He probably is always down to go on television. And culturally, that makes a huge difference at ESPN when you're always down to appear and go through this insane schedule to do the Stephen A. Smith, I sleep in my office
That's why I was gonna say
approach.
Stephen A. Smith is gonna get 20-25 million dollars a year because of
Mhm.
that attitude.
They love availability. They
Yeah.
love availability, and I never talked about with Zach, but I would assume that Zach was somebody who said, "Hey, I've got a family and I need bandwidth to focus and do what I do. I'm not just gonna jump on TV all the time." But that's the culture over there. I once was asked when I was covering the Warriors to appear on TV, multiple times throughout July 4th and to just go down to the Oakland Marriott and set up shop there. And my wife put her foot down and she said no. It had already been crazy. The schedule had already been insane. And I'm not saying that's why I eventually got laid off, a la Zach Lowe, but that definitely was not the right thing to do. You hear whispers and murmurs when you don't show up on TV when they want you, it becomes a problem. So even if it's such a vast institution and nobody knows what's going on, the signal that cuts through the noise isn't available, and that can expedite your exit out of the company just because nobody's figured out a same way to do it. And hey, availability, it's a TV company being available on TV. I guess that's what counts for the most over there.
One of the things I talked about this morning was the idea that so many people are upset at ESPN for doing this, but it's actually probably a good thing because Zach's content can be better on his
Yeah.
own. Is that something
Oh
you
yeah.
agree with?
Oh, I completely agree with it. I've on a smaller scale because Zach's a bigger deal than I am and a bigger deal in the NBA world. But I experienced that for myself where I got laid off from ESPN. It's a terrible day. It's just really destabilizing and rejecting, and you don't even see it coming, as I imagine Zach didn't. Again, I haven't talked about it with him. And then the next day, I just felt this powerful relief because of some of the conditions I was talking about. And you almost feel guilty because you have a job people are jealous of. So you don't even want to admit to yourself that it's become as miserable as it's become. Because every wedding you go to, some dude sits down next to you and goes, "Oh my God, that's the most amazing." Oh, blah, 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 blah. And there are better jobs, and they might not be better in terms of the brand, but there are better ways to do it. For me, I came back about a year later with The Athletic, and I had the greatest run that I've ever experienced covering the NBA. I'm not saying greatest is in my output, but I'm
Yeah.
just saying I thought it was better than what it was at ESPN. And I worked with Tim Kawakami and Marcus Thompson and Anthony Slater, and it was such a healthier work situation than it was before.
Was that because you
And
didn't have to do TV?
I mean, that was a big aspect of it. I
Yeah.
mean, just not having to do that was definitely.
On July 4th, at
d-
least.
I mean, yeah, by the way, July 4th. I mean, Kevin Durant did sign with the Warriors on July 4th. You could see why they had a case for firing me, but that's neither here nor there. Um, yeah, to not have to worry about all that other stuff and get pulled in different directions and to just go, I want to write about basketball and maybe podcast about basketball once or twice a week and write the best articles possible. And when we show up, that's what we're doing. And we're going in the locker room, we're finding the best article. When I was at ESPN, they were saying, we need something 5 minutes after the buzzer. And when something goes down, we need you up at 5 a.m. doing TV hits and blah, 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 blah. Look, human beings, you've got a finite amount of focus, sleep, and attention. My work was worse by the end there at ESPN. And I don't know what Zach's going through, but if he could dictate his own schedule and reduce it to a lot of whatever he is truly energized to do and not have to do some of the TV stuff, I wouldn't be surprised if all of a sudden you're going, "Oh my god, this is the best Zach Lowe." I mean, I thought Grantland was the best Zach Lowe, but this is the best Zach Lowe that I've been getting. This is incredible. Where was this? I think the conditions might be they might be better for him. I totally agree with that interpretation.
Yeah, and I like the fact that you mentioned what energizes him, right? It's like if you go find something that you actually want to write about, it's going to be 10 times better than it would have been if ESPN told you, "Hey, we need a story
Yeah.
breaking down XYZ." Um, go ahead.
No, no, I was about to say I completely agree. I mean, sometimes with us, we get to choose a lot of our topics.
Yeah.
Sometimes we'll choose a topic that doesn't work, and maybe we were into that topic, but the audience wasn't. But I believe that for it to have a chance of connecting, we have to be energized. I think you are drawing dead if you're not into what you're talking about. But if you are, you got a good chance. Nobody knew that the Oakland A's using math to become better at baseball was going to be a massive genre defining story in the early 2000s. It was just what Michael Lewis happened to be interested in. So, yes, I think when somebody with the talent and smarts of Zach Lowe is truly into what he's doing, it's got a great chance of connecting.